They thought it was just another traffic stop. Just another chance to flex their power on a man they thought couldn't fight back. But what they didn't know is that the man behind the wheel was no ordinary citizen. He was a sitting Supreme Court justice. And tonight, they picked the wrong target. What starts as a simple stop on a quiet street quickly spirals into a dangerous game of power, corruption, and betrayal. And trust me, you won't believe how far they're willing to go to cover their tracks. But here's the thing, he's not backing down. And when the truth finally comes out, they'll realize they messed with the one man who could take them all down. Stick with us, because this story is bigger than any one man. It's about justice, it's about accountability, and it's about what happens when you refuse to stay silent. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments what time are you watching, and where are you tuning in from. Drop your city below, hit that like button if you're ready for the truth, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story is one you'll never forget. There's something about Sunday afternoons that feels sacred, even when the world around you doesn't ooze the lies. For Harold Freeman, Sundays had become a ritual, a quiet drive along the scenic Blue Ridge Parkway in his favorite car, a restored 1970 Pontiac Bonneville, topped off with dinner at his daughter's house. It wasn't much, but at 76 years old, it was enough. It was tradition. It was peace. The air was crisp that afternoon, the kind of early fall breeze that carried just a hint of winter's arrival. Trees lining the road had already started turning shades of amber and deep red, their leaves fluttering gently to the ground. Harold, dressed in his usual gray wool coat and signature fedora, tapped the steering wheel lightly in rhythm with an old Sam Cooke song playing low from the car's worn-out speakers. He smiled to himself, thinking about his wife Angela. 3 years had passed since she'd left him. Cancer, the thief of time. But Harold still visited her grave every Sunday without fail. It was the first stop on his route before heading to his daughter Camille's house for dinner with the family. She'd always scold him for being a little late, but deep down, she understood. This drive, this ritual, it connected him to something bigger than the busy courtroom schedules, bigger than the titles people like to throw around, bigger than the heavy burden that came with being a sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court. You'd think with that kind of title, Harold wouldn't have to worry about much on the road. But if you grew up black in America, especially a black man in the South, you learned early that some people don't see the man. They only see the color. No title could change that, not even the highest one in the land. And today, that truth was about to hit Harold harder than he ever expected. As he cruised through Asheville's historic district, Harold noticed a police cruiser parked on the side of the road near an old brick Baptist church. Nothing unusual, or so he thought. He kept his eyes on the road, signaled properly as he turned down Woodbury Lane, heading toward Camille's neighborhood. But something didn't sit right. He checked his rearview mirror. The cruiser was moving now, pulling out from the curb, easing up behind him. Harold's jaw clenched slightly. He knew that move. He'd seen it before. Follow without flashing the lights. Close enough to intimidate, but not enough to justify a complaint. His fingers tightened just a little on the steering wheel. He took a slow breath, reminding himself to stay calm. Maybe it was nothing, but it wasn't. The cruiser stayed behind him, block after block. Closer. Closer. Harold's heart rate picked up just a little. Not fear, no, he'd learned to suppress that a long time ago, but frustration, disappointment. Here he was again, 76 years old, a lifetime of service to the law, and still, this. As he approached the stop sign at Magnolia and Ridgeview, Harold made sure to signal early. He came to a complete stop textbook, perfect. He glanced up again. The cruiser was still there, creeping up like a shadow that refused to let go. And then, there it was. The red and blue lights flashed in his mirror. The piercing sound of the siren shattered the Sunday quiet like a slap to the face. Harold eased his car to the side of the road, flipped on his hazard lights, and placed both hands on top of the steering wheel, fingers spread wide. He sat perfectly still. He knew the drill. After all these years, the ritual had become second nature. He tilted his head back and let out a long, slow breath. "Here we go again," he whispered to himself. He could see the officer's silhouette in the side mirror. White male, maybe mid-30s, fit build, walking toward him with a little too much energy. His hand was already resting on his holster. Harold noticed that immediately. No, this wasn't routine, not at all. The officer didn't approach like someone checking on a taillight or an expired tag. He approached like someone hunting something, or someone. Harold could feel it in his bones. Still, he kept his composure. He knew better than to make any sudden moves. His life had taught him that much. The officer stopped just short of Harold's window, hand still on his holster, and leaned down with a sneer on his face. "License and registration." "Now." "No." "Good afternoon, sir." No explanation for the stop. Just authority, laced with hostility. Harold nodded slowly, his voice calm but steady. "Yes, officer. I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket for my wallet first, then the glove compartment for my registration. I'm letting you know so there are no misunderstandings." The officer said nothing, just narrowed his eyes like a man itching for something to go wrong. Harold carefully retrieved his wallet, pulling out his license and the small leather credential holder that bore the seal of the United States Supreme Court. He held it up where the officer could see before placing it on the dashboard. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the registration papers. He placed them alongside his license, keeping his hands visible the entire time. The officer leaned closer, eyeing the credentials without flinching. "And whose car is this?" the officer asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Harold didn't bite. He knew exactly what was happening. "This is my car. I've owned it for over 30 years, he answered with controlled politeness. "And as you can see, I'm Justice Harold Freeman of the United States Supreme Court." The officer's smirk widened. A cold, mocking laugh escaped his lips. "Supreme Court? Yeah, right. That's a new one. You really expect me to buy that?" And just like that, Harold knew. This was bigger than just a traffic stop. This was a setup, and it was only the beginning. There's a moment. Just a moment. When your brain tries to convince you this isn't happening. That maybe, somehow, you've misunderstood the situation. That all those years of knowing better don't apply this time. But Harold Freeman wasn't new to this. He knew that moment well. And as much as he wished it wasn't true, his instincts had already told him this officer wasn't backing down. Officer Scott Brewster stood there, squinting at Harold's license like it was written in a language he didn't speak. His lips curled into a smirk as he slowly looked up, pretending to read every word even though Harold knew he wasn't processing anything. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about the truth. This was about control, about power, about proving something. To himself, to Harold, to whoever was listening on that police. "You got proof this is your car?" Brewster asked, though the registration was sitting right in front of him, plain as day. Harold stayed calm. He'd faced senators, prosecutors, even heads of state, but none of them had the power to make a life-or-death decision in a split second with a loaded weapon like this man did. Harold kept his voice steady. "You're holding it, officer. The registration is there, along with my license and my Supreme Court credentials." Brewster leaned his forearm on the doorframe of the Pontiac, glancing down at the leather case bearing the United States Supreme Court seal. He laughed again, this time louder. "You must think I'm stupid, old man," he sneered. "Anybody can buy one of these online. Hell, I could print this in my basement." Harold didn't move, didn't flinch. He just met Brewster's glare with a measured look of his own. "Officer, if you run my name through your system, you'll find that I'm exactly who I say I am. Justice Harold Freeman. Seat number 6. Sworn in by the president 3 years ago." Brewster leaned back, sucking his teeth like Harold had just told him the sky was green. "Oh, I'll run it all right," Brewster spat. "But first, step out of the car." Harold's chest tightened. His fingers flexed slightly on the steering wheel. "With respect, officer," Harold replied, choosing every word with the precision of a man who had argued constitutional law for 40 years. "I haven't committed any crime. I've provided full identification, and I have every right to remain in my vehicle unless you have probable cause." Brewster's jaw tightened. That wasn't the answer he wanted. "Oh, you want to play smart guy now, huh?" Brewster taunted, leaning closer again. "Get out of the car, now." Harold didn't move. "Sir, am I being detained or am I free to go?" he asked, his voice steady, but his heart starting to race. That's when Brewster reached for his body camera and clicked it off. Harold saw it. Clear as day, the little red light blinked off. His stomach dropped. Brewster took a step back, hand now fully gripping his holstered weapon. His eyes darted toward his patrol car. Harold knew what was coming. He'd seen this before in court transcripts, in civil rights cases, in the countless stories that never made the evening news. This wasn't a routine stop. This was a narrative being built in real time. Harold let out a slow breath. He knew this game, but this was no courtroom. And right now, he wasn't Justice Freeman. He was just another black man alone on the side of the road. "I'm giving you one last warning," Brewster growled, hand resting heavy on his gun. "Step out, or I'll pull you out." Harold weighed his options. He could sit still, assert his rights, and risk this man escalating to something deadly. Or he could comply and pray that cooperation might be enough to de-escalate this ticking time bomb. Reluctantly, Harold nodded. "I'm 76 years old, officer," he said slowly. "I have arthritis. I'm going to move carefully so I don't fall." He unbuckled his seatbelt, keeping his hands visible the entire time. He turned slowly, swinging his legs out first, planting his feet firmly on the ground. He placed his hands on top of the car door, pushing himself up with effort. His knees cracked loudly as he stood, and he let out a small grunt from the stiffness in his joints. Brewster didn't care. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, grabbed Harold's arm, and yanked it behind his back with unnecessary force. Harold grimaced, pain shooting through his shoulder. "Face the car," Brewster barked, shoving him against the cold metal of the Pontiac's hood. Harold tried to speak, but Brewster pressed a forearm into his back, cutting off his breath for a moment. "You smell like alcohol," Brewster declared loudly, as if making sure anyone nearby could hear. "We're gonna run a field sobriety test." Harold's mouth fell open in disbelief. "That's absurd," he protested. "I haven't had a drop of alcohol." "Shut up," Brewster snapped, cutting him off. "You're going to do exactly what I say." Harold swallowed the lump rising in his throat. He glanced around. No witnesses, no cameras, just him, this officer, and the creeping sense that things were about to get much, much worse. Brewster stepped back, ordering Harold to turn around and face him. Harold complied, moving slowly. Brewster held up a small penlight, shining it in Harold's eyes. "Follow the light," Brewster ordered. Harold did as instructed, even though he knew this wasn't standard procedure for a non-traffic violation. "Walk in a straight line, heel to toe," Brewster commanded next, stepping back to give Harold space. Harold sighed quietly. His body ached from standing, his joints stiff from age, but he complied, taking careful steps along the gravel shoulder of the road. "Now stand on one foot," Brewster ordered, smirking like it was some kind of game. Harold tried. He really did, but arthritis isn't something you can just ignore. His balance faltered after a few seconds, and Brewster clapped sarcastically. "Well, well," Brewster taunted. "Looks like we got ourselves a DUI." Harold's jaw clenched. His heart pounded in his chest not from exertion, but from anger and fear. This wasn't just harassment. This was a setup, a trap, a lie being built brick by brick. "Officer," Harold tried one last time, forcing every ounce of calm he had left into his voice. "You know who I am. You know exactly what this is. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything." Brewster leaned in, his face inches from Harold's. "Old man," he whispered coldly, "you think that badge makes you untouchable? Not today." And then, without warning, Brewster turned, walked back to his cruiser, and picked up his radio. "Dispatch. I've got a possible Dewey. Resisting compliance. Suspicious behavior. Requesting backup." Harold stood there, frozen, helpless, as the weight of it all sank in. This was far from over, and the real nightmare was just beginning. Backup was coming. That's all Harold could think as he stood there on the side of that empty road, his heart pounding louder than the crickets in the distance. He knew what requesting backup really meant. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about protocol. It was about stacking the deck, about making sure there were more uniforms than witnesses, more threats than truth. Harold shifted his weight, trying to ease the pressure building in his lower back. He dared a glance over his shoulder toward Officer Brewster, who was leaning casually against his patrol car like this was just another Sunday shift. Brewster glanced up and caught Harold. Harold turned back toward his car, staring at the reflection in the windshield. The man staring back at him didn't look like a Supreme Court justice. He didn't look like the man who'd written landmark opinions on civil rights, voting protections, and equal justice. No, he just looked like an old black man caught on the wrong side of power. And deep down, Harold knew that's exactly how Brewster saw him. Minutes felt like hours. Then, the sound of tires on gravel snapped Harold's attention toward the end of the street. Another cruiser was pulling up. The second officer, Linda Draper, stepped out, adjusting her belt like she had all the time in the world. She was younger than Brewster, maybe early 30s, short blonde hair, cold blue eyes. Harold had seen her before at city events. She never spoke to him, never even nodded in recognition, just watched, like she was keeping score. Draper approached Brewster, glancing briefly at Harold but saying nothing. The two exchanged whispers just out of earshot. Harold strained to hear, but the hum of the idling engines drowned them out. What he didn't miss, though, was the way Draper's eyes flicked toward him, cold and calculating, like she was deciding how far she was willing to go. Brewster turned back toward Harold, cracking his knuckles as he approached. "All right, Judge," Brewster sneered, putting heavy sarcasm on the word. "You're coming with us." Harold's stomach dropped. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't refused. He hadn't done a single thing wrong. Yet here he was, standing on the edge of being arrested like a common criminal. "For what charge, officer?" Harold asked, his voice tight. Brewster smirked. "Suspicion of driving under the influence and impersonating a federal official." Harold's jaw tensed, but he stayed calm. "You know those charges won't hold up," Harold warned. Brewster leaned in, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "Maybe not, but they'll hold long enough to ruin your night, and maybe your reputation." Draper stepped up behind Harold, pulling out her cuffs like it was routine. Harold closed his eyes for a brief second. He thought about Camille, about his grandkids, about Angela. Would they ever believe this? Would they understand why he hadn't called? Why he hadn't fought back? Because right now, fighting back would get him killed. "I'm not resisting," Harold said clearly, his voice steady, as he raised his hands slowly. Draper grabbed his wrist, twisting it a little harder than necessary, locking the cuffs around his wrists. Harold winced. His arthritic joints flared with sharp pain, but he bit down on his lip and said nothing. Brewster and Draper led him toward Brewster's cruiser, opening the back door like they were tossing out trash. Harold ducked his head, sliding in slowly, the cuffs digging into his skin with every movement. The door slammed shut behind him. And just like that, Harold Freeman, Justice of the United States Supreme Court, was officially in police custody. He watched through the window as Brewster walked back to his Pontiac. Harold's heart skipped a beat when Brewster leaned inside, opening the glove compartment, rifling through the console without a warrant, without permission, without cause. Then, Harold saw it. Brewster palmed something small, something white, and slipped it into the center console. Harold's blood ran cold. "Number. No, no, no." Harold leaned forward, shouting through the glass. "Hey! You can't do that! I see you! I see what you're doing!" But Brewster ignored him. Draper just leaned against her cruiser, arms crossed, watching like this was a movie she'd seen before. Harold slammed his shoulder against the door, but the locks were already engaged. He was trapped, helpless, forced to watch as Brewster manufactured the final nail in his coffin. Brewster walked back to Draper, holding up the small plastic bag like it was the trophy of the night. "Well, well," Brewster announced loudly enough for Harold to hear. "Looks like our Supreme Court justice here forgot to mention the narcotics in his vehicle." Draper chuckled, shaking her head in mock disappointment. Harold felt rage rise in his throat like bile. He leaned forward again, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. "That is not mine," Harold shouted. "You planted that! You planted it!" Brewster leaned down, locking eyes with Harold through the glass. "Yeah?" Brewster whispered, grinning. "Tell it to the judge." The door to the cruiser opened, and Brewster slid into the driver's seat. Draper got in the passenger side. Brewster glanced at Harold in the rearview mirror, adjusting it slowly. Harold stared back, breathing hard, trying to steady himself, knowing this was just the beginning. "Dispatch," Brewster called over the radio, flipping on the lights. "We have one in custody. Suspected DUI, narcotics possession, impersonating a federal official, transporting to county lockup." Harold leaned back, staring up at the ceiling of the cruiser. His heart pounded. His fists clenched so tight, his knuckles turned white. This was happening. He was being taken in, booked, processed, like every case he'd ever fought, to protect the innocent from. Except tonight, he was the innocent one. And no title, no robe, no courtroom could protect him from what was coming next. The cruiser rolled slowly through the quiet streets of Asheville, the flashing lights painting the houses in red and blue. Every turn of the tires felt heavier than the last. Harold Freeman sat in the back seat, head pressed against the cold glass, trying to steady his breathing. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. His wrists ached from the cuffs, biting into his skin tighter with every bump in the road. He wanted to believe that any minute now, someone would recognize him, that someone would step in and stop this madness. But the deeper they drove into the city, the clearer it became. No one was coming. Not yet. Brewster and Draper didn't say a word the entire ride. They didn't have to. Harold knew what they were thinking. This wasn't about justice. This wasn't about law. This was personal. It was power. And they knew they had it. The cruiser pulled into the back lot of the Asheville Police Department. No cameras, no reporters, just a heavy metal gate that slid closed behind them with a hollow thud. Brewster killed the engine, sat for a moment, then turned toward Draper. "Get him out." Draper nodded, stepping out and opening Harold's door. "Let's go," she ordered. Harold shifted, groaning as his knees protested. He turned carefully, scooting to the edge of the seat. His body felt heavy, slower than usual. The stress was already taking its toll. He could feel it in his chest, tight, pressing, like a warning that refused to be ignored. As he stood, Draper grabbed his arm roughly, pulling him forward toward a side door. Inside, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The hallways smelled like sweat, bleach, and something sour that no amount of cleaning could hide. Harold glanced around. A few officers leaned against the walls, watching silently. Some looked curious. Others smirked. Not a single one looked surprised. Brewster led the way to the booking desk. A young officer with a clipboard looked up, his face immediately registering confusion. Who's this?" the officer asked. Brewster slammed the evidence bag on the counter, the small plastic bag of white powder like it was a prize he'd won at a carnival. "DUI, possession. Impersonating a federal official," Brewster announced loudly, making sure everyone within earshot heard. The officer blinked, glancing at Harold again, as if trying to piece it all together. "Sir, is your name really?" Harold lifted his chin, using every ounce of his courtroom presence to keep his voice steady. "Yes, Justice Harold Freeman, United States Supreme Court." The officer's face went pale, eyes darting toward Brewster. But Brewster didn't flinch. He leaned across the desk, lowering his voice just enough that Harold could still hear. "Fake credentials. He's been impersonating a federal judge, planting drugs in his own car to sell some sob story. We caught him in the act." Harold's fists clenched at his side. "That's a lie," Harold said clearly. "They're lying." Brewster leaned back, folding his arms like he'd heard it all before. "Book him," Brewster ordered, stepping aside. The young officer hesitated, shifting nervously. I think we should call the captain." "Book him," Brewster repeated, his voice cold and final. Harold felt his stomach turn as the officer slowly reached for the intake forms. He knew the system. Once those papers were filed, it wouldn't matter who he was. The headlines would come later, but by then, the narrative would already be written. He was fingerprinted, photographed. The flash of the camera felt like a punch to the gut. His name, his legacy, reduced to a case number on a flimsy plastic wristband. He tried to keep his breathing steady, but the tightness in his chest was getting worse. His hands were trembling now, not just from rage, but from something deeper, something familiar. His heart, he could feel it racing, pounding against his ribs like it was trying to break free. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his vision blurred for just a second. He tried to shake it off, but he knew the signs. He'd been here before. "Officer!" Harold tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse. I have a heart condition. I need my medication. In my coat pocket." No response. "Please." He tried again, this time louder. "I need medical attention." Draper rolled her eyes, looking bored. "You'll get checked when medical makes rounds," she muttered. Harold's breath hitched. His knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the counter, struggling to stay upright. "I'm serious," Harold gasped. I'm having chest pains." Brewster let out a low chuckle. "Criminals always pull that card," he sneered. "You'll live." But Harold knew better. He'd felt this before. Years ago, that crushing pressure, like a cinder block on his chest, the tingling in his left arm, the taste of copper on his tongue. This wasn't anxiety. This wasn't stress. This was a heart attack. He tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. His vision narrowed, the edges of the room fading to gray. He felt his legs give out, the cold floor rushing up to meet him as he collapsed, gasping for air. A guard shouted something, but Harold couldn't hear. His ears were ringing. His heart was hammering like it was trying to break through his rib cage. He heard someone yell for medical. Footsteps rushed toward him. Hands grabbed his shoulders, rolling him onto his back. Voices blurred together shouting, swearing, panic. And then, blackness. The first thing Harold felt was the chill of the oxygen mask pressed over his face. He tried to open his eyes, but the light above him felt too bright-like, staring straight into the sun. Voices floated in and out, muffled at first, like they were coming through water. He blinked again, slower this time, and the blinding white started to fade into focus. He was in a hospital room. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the air, quick and sharp. His chest ached like someone had placed a 1,000-pound weight on top of him. He reached instinctively for his chest, but his hands stopped short. He was cuffed, both wrists secured to the bed rails. He swallowed hard, panic rising in his throat. A face leaned into Viewa, middle-aged Asian man in scrubs, adjusting Harold's fourth. He glanced down, surprised to see Harold awake. "Justice Freeman! Can you hear me?" the man asked gently. Harold nodded weakly, his throat dry as sandpaper. Where am I?" he rasped. "Asheville General," the man replied. "You had a hypertensive episode. Your blood pressure spiked dangerously high. You blacked out in holding." Harold tried to sit up, but the cuffs tightened around his wrists. The man raised a hand. "Easy, easy. Don't strain yourself." Why am I cuffed?" Harold whispered, his voice cracking. Before the man could answer, another voice cut through the air like a blade. "Because you're under arrest." Officer Brewster stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking like he owned the place. Draper wasn't far behind him, standing back with her usual blank expression. Harold's heart rate ticked up on the monitor. The doctor turned, frowning. "Officer, this patient needs rest. He's in critical." "He's in custody," Brewster snapped. "He stays cuffed." Harold clenched his jaw, trying to summon the strength to sit up straighter. "Get out," he croaked. Brewster took a step closer, lowering his voice like they were old friends sharing a secret. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. You're mine until we say otherwise." The doctor stepped between them, raising his voice this time. "Out, now." Brewster glared at the doctor but finally backed off, motioning for Draper to follow. They left the room, the door clicking shut behind them. Harold slumped back against the bed, closing his eyes. He felt the weight of it all pressing down on him, heavier than ever. He was trapped. Powerless. No courtroom, no bench, no robe, just a number on a hospital chart, and a target on his back. He didn't know how long he drifted in and out of sleep, but when he woke again, the room was darker, quieter. The hallway beyond the door hummed softly with distant footsteps and rolling carts. Then he heard it the softest knock. Harold turned his head toward the door. It cracked open just a few inches. A familiar voice slipped through, low and urgent. "Dad, it's me, Camille." Harold's heart surged not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. Camille slipped into the room, her face pale, her eyes wide with barely contained emotion. She looked him over, taking in the IVs, the monitors, the cuffs. She pressed her hand over her mouth, swallowing a sob. "Oh my God, Dad," she whispered. Harold tried to speak, but his throat tightened again. All he could do was shake his head, fighting back tears he hadn't even realized were there. Camille rushed to his side, grabbing his hand, the only part of him not hooked up or strapped down. I'm here, okay? You're not alone." Harold felt the first tear slip down his cheek, hot and bitter. They planted drugs, Camille," he whispered, his voice shaking. "They're framing me." Camille nodded. gripping his hand tighter. "I know, Dad, I know. Teresa's already on her way. We're not letting this go." Harold closed his eyes, the relief almost overwhelming, but Camille wasn't finished. "There's more," she whispered, glancing toward the door. "They've already leaked it to the press. They're spinning a story that you were drunk, that you were violent, that you resisted." Harold's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "That's a lie," he rasped. "I know," Camille said softly. "But they're doubling down. The mayor, the police chief, they're trying to make this disappear before it gets bigger. They're already drafting a mutual understanding agreement." Harold knew what that meant. Legal silence. No lawsuits. No public statements. No accountability. Over his dead body. "No," Harold whispered firmly. "No deal." Camille smiled through her tears. "I told them you'd say that." Just then, the door swung open again. Brewster stepped inside, followed by Chief of Police Alan Mercera, tall, broad man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a politician's fake smile. "Well, well," Mercer said smoothly. "Glad to see you're awake, Justice Freeman." Camille stood, positioning herself between the bed and the men like a human shield. "What do you want?" she snapped. Mercer raised his hands in mock surrender. "Just here to clear the air," he replied. "We realize there's been a misunderstanding." Harold let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You call this a misunderstanding?" Massa kept smiling, stepping closer. "We're prepared to resolve this quietly. No charges, no media circus. We'll issue a formal apology, make a generous donation to your foundation. All you have to do is sign a simple statement, acknowledging that things got, well, a little out of hand." Camille's fists balled at her sides. "And what happens when you do this to someone who doesn't sit on the Supreme Court?" she hissed. Mercer's smile faded, just a little. "That's not your concern." Harold took a slow breath. His chest still ached, but his mind had never been clearer. "I'm not signing anything," Harold said, his voice shaking but firm. "I'm pressing charges. I'm calling for a federal investigation. And when the world finds out what you did—" He leaned forward as far as the cuffs would allow, locking eyes with Mercer. "You're going to answer for all of it." Mercer's smile vanished. He exchanged a quick glance with Brewster, who looked like he was ready to explode. Camille leaned closer to her father, whispering softly, "Don't worry, Dad. We've got them right where we want them." But Harold knew better. This wasn't over, not even close. Camille wasn't sure how she managed to keep her composure when the police chief and Officer Brewster finally left the room. She stood there for several long seconds, staring at the door after it clicked shut, making sure they were really gone. Her hands trembled as she turned back to her father. The sight of him hooked up to all those machines, shackled like a common criminal. It broke something deep inside her. She took another steadying breath, wiped her eyes, and leaned in closer. "Dad, Teresa's on her way here. She's not coming alone. She's bringing the media, legal observers, and a whole team. They're not going to sweep this under the rug." Harold's chest rose and fell slowly. His breathing was still labored, but his mind stayed sharp. He nodded as best he could. "Did you call your mother's Sam?" Camille frowned in confusion for a second, then realization dawned. "Dr. Samuel Reed, the cardiologist?" Harold gave the faintest smile. "Good man, old friend. If anyone can cut through this medical hold they've got me in, it's him." Camille didn't hesitate. She reached for her phone and started typing. She knew how this worked. They couldn't trust anyone from the city anymore. They needed someone with enough credentials, enough authority, to force the hospital to stop treating her father like a criminal and start treating him like the patient he was. Less than 30 minutes later, Dr. Samuel Reed stormed into the room like a man on a mission. He barely acknowledged the officers stationed outside the door. Camille had barely hung up the phone when he arrived, dressed in his full hospital-issued white coat with Chief of Cardiology embroidered in gold above his pocket. "Harold," Sam breathed, rushing to the bedside. "Lord have mercy! Look what they've done to you!" Harold managed a weak grin. "Took you long enough." Sam leaned in close, gripping Harold's shoulder with the kind of touch only a lifelong friend could give. "Don't worry, I'm here now." Camille filled him in quickly, telling him everything about the fake charges, the planted drugs, the threats, the illegal arrest. Sam's face darkened with every word. By the time she finished, his jaw was locked tight. He turned to Harold, checked the monitors, and then glanced at the cuffs. "This is a medical violation," Sam muttered. "They have no right to restrain you without a medical safety order. And you damn well don't need restraints." He marched to the door, flung it open, and barked loud enough for the entire wing to hear. "I need the attending physician in here now. And get me the hospital administrator." The officers at the door exchanged glances, but no one moved to stop him. Within minutes, the attending physician arrived nervous, flustered, clearly not expecting anyone to challenge the status quo. Sam didn't waste time. He demanded immediate removal of the restraints, citing hospital policy and federal patient rights. "You either take them off, or I'll escalate this to the State Medical Board and the Department of Health and Human Services," Sam warned. The attending tried to push back, mumbling something about police orders, but Sam cut him off with a glare. "Do it, now." Reluctantly, the doctor nodded. Moments later, the cuffs were finally removed. Harold flexed his swollen wrists, wincing as the circulation returned. Camille squeezed his hand. "We're not done yet," she whispered. Sam turned back to them, lowering his voice. "Listen, they're going to try to keep you here until they can control the fallout. But I've got contacts who can override the administrative hold. You'll be discharged under medical advisement, but you'll be free to leave." Harold nodded slowly. "And the police? I'll handle them," Sam promised. But even as the words left his mouth, Camille's phone buzzed. She glanced down. It was Teresa Holt. Camille answered immediately. "Teresa, we're in the room. Sam's here. They just took off the cuffs." Teresa's voice was tense. "Good. But listen to me carefully. The mayor just held a press conference. They're already spinning this as a case of mistaken identity. They're painting your dad as a confused elderly man who refused to cooperate with police instructions." Cammie's blood ran cold. "Of course they are. There's more," Teresa continued. "They've filed paperwork to have him transferred to a county medical holding facility for observation. It's a legal trap. Once he's transferred, they'll have total control again." Camille turned to her father, her heart racing. "We have to move, now." Sam leaned in, lowering his voice. "I can arrange for a private ambulance. I'll sign the release forms myself. But you need to be gone before that transfer order arrives." Harold swung his legs off the bed, gritting his teeth against the stiffness in his body. "Then what are we waiting for?" Camille helped him stand, steadying him as Sam moved to the door. "I'll clear the hallway," Sam muttered. It all happened faster than Camille expected. Sam coordinated with a trusted ambulance crew from a neighboring city people he knew personally. Within 15 minutes, a private ambulance backed up to the emergency bay. Sam escorted Harold and Camille through the side corridors, bypassing the officers who were still stationed at the main entrance. The moment they reached the ambulance, Camille helped her father inside. The paramedics nodded to Sam, understanding the urgency. "You'll be safe with them," Sam whispered. Harold gripped his friend's hand one last time. "Thank you, old friend," Sam nodded, his face tight with emotion. "You make sure they answer for this, Harold. All of them." The doors slammed shut, and the ambulance pulled away, leaving Sam standing under the flickering emergency lights. Inside the ambulance, Camille sat beside her father, holding his hand tightly as the city disappeared behind them. "We're going to Mom's cousin's house," she whispered. "It's out in the mountains, remote, secure. They won't find you there." Harold nodded weakly, his eyelids growing heavier. "Good," he whispered. "We're going to need every advantage we can get." Camille swallowed hard, staring out the window as the city lights faded into darkness. Because she knew they hadn't seen the worst of it yet, not even close. The drive up to the mountains was quiet, too quiet. Camille sat in the back of the ambulance beside her father, clutching his hand like she was afraid to let go. Harold, though exhausted, stayed awake, his eyes locked on the ceiling, processing every minute of the nightmare they'd just barely escaped. He knew the clock was ticking. They'd bought themselves some time, but not much. Once the police realized he wasn't at the hospital anymore, they'd ramp up their efforts to find him. And Harold also knew they wouldn't be playing fair. Camille's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the screen. It was Teresa again. Camille answered with a whisper. "We're on the road. What's the latest?" Teresa's voice came through tight and urgent. "They just filed an emergency motion claiming you and your father fled in violation of a court-ordered medical hold. They're framing it like an escape attempt." Camille cursed under her breath. "They're moving faster than I thought." "Yeah, and that's not all," Teresa continued. "The mayor just went on live television claiming that your father's mental state is, and I quote, a growing concern to federal authorities. They're trying to paint him as senile, unstable, unfit for the bench. Camille felt like she'd been punched in the gut. They're trying to break him down publicly before he can fight back. Teresa didn't deny it. Exactly. They're setting the narrative. If we don't move just as faster they're going to win this in the court of public opinion before we ever get to a real court. Camille squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the surge of helplessness rising inside her. She looked down at her father, who was already watching her, with sharp, knowing eyes. "Put her on speaker," Harold rasped. Camille didn't hesitate. She tapped the speaker button and held the phone between them. "Teresa," Harold said, his voice weak but steady, "I want you to get in touch with the Department of Justice, specifically Alexandra Rivera. Tell her, it's time." Camille frowned. "Dad, are you sure?" Harold nodded, his jaw tightening. "We've tried to handle this quietly. They've made it clear they have no intention of playing by the rules, so neither can we." Teresa didn't waste a second. "I'll make the call." Camille hung up and leaned in closer to her father. "Who's Alexandra Rivera?" Harold's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "Senior Counsel, Civil Rights Division, DOJ. I worked with her years ago on police misconduct cases. She's one of the few people I trust to go after something this big." Camille nodded slowly, feeling the gears begin to turn again. Maybe, just maybe, they had a shot. An hour later, the ambulance reached the Freeman family's safe house, a cabin deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains owned by Judge Ellis Harmon, Harold's closest friend and former law school roommate. The old judge greeted them at the door, his face tight with worry but his arms wide open. "Brother," Ellis whispered, pulling Harold into a careful embrace. "I can't believe they've done this to you." Harold leaned heavily on his friend, his body shaking with fatigue. "I can." Camille and the paramedics helped settle Harold into the cabin's small guest bedroom while Ellis secured the perimeter. He'd already prepped the place like a fortress: surveillance cameras, reinforced locks, and emergency phones with secure lines. The retired judge didn't take chances, not when it came to family. While Harold rested, Camille stepped into the living room, her phone already ringing again. It was Teresa. "I got her," Teresa said without preamble. "Alexandra's on board. She's calling in a federal review team first thing in the morning." "But Camille, there's more." Cammie's heart dropped. "What?" "I just spoke with a contact inside the city's legal department. The police chief and the mayor. They're about to move on Michael." Camille's blood ran cold. Michael, her husband, Harold's son-in-law. He'd been at home with their kids the whole time, trying to hold down the fort while she fought to protect her father. "They're what?" Camille hissed. "They're filing charges against him," Teresa confirmed. "Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering. They're claiming he tampered with your dad's car before it was impounded." Camille ran a hand through her hair, pacing the small living room. "This is retaliation. Pure retaliation." "Exactly," Teresa said. "They're squeezing you, trying to force you to back down." Camille looked toward the bedroom where her father was sleeping, her heart pounding in her chest. "They don't know us very well, do they?" Teresa let out the faintest laugh. "Apparently not. Tell Alexandra we need protection for Michael and the kids. Now." Already on it, Camille ended the call and immediately dialed her husband. The moment he answered, she could hear the tension in his voice. "Camille? Baby, listen to me," she whispered. "They're coming after you next. You need to get the kids and go to your mother's. Take the back roads. Don't go home. Don't go to the firm. They're watching you." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then Michael's voice came through, tight but steady. "Copy that. I'm on my way." Camille hung up and leaned her head against the nearest wall, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. How had it come to this? Her father, a Supreme Court justice, being hunted like a criminal. Her husband being targeted as leverage. Their children caught in the middle. The door creaked softly behind her. She turned to see Ellis standing there, holding 2 glasses of bourbon. He handed her one without a word. She took it with shaky hands. "He's strong," Ellis whispered. "Stronger than most." Camille nodded, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "But how much more can they throw at us before something breaks?" Ellis looked her dead in the eye. "Nothing breaks, unless you let it." Camille swallowed hard and took a long sip of the bourbon, feeling the burn all the way down. When she stepped back into her father's room, Harold's eyes were open. He was waiting for her. "Come sit," he rasped. She sat on the edge of the bed, taking his hand. "Michael's on the move. They're targeting him next." Harold nodded. already knowing. They're trying to divide us, isolate us. It's textbook. Camille's voice cracked. What do we do? Harold squeezed her hand, his old courtroom fire flickering in his tired eyes. We fight smarter. We fight louder. And we don't let them write the ending. Camille leaned in, resting her forehead against his. Then let's finish what they started. Would you like me to move on with part 8, 1,300 words? Morning came fast and hard. Harold barely slept. Camille didn't either. Every creak in the old cabin, every branch brushing the windows in the wind, felt like it could be them police cars pulling up, boots on the porch, another set of lies ready to be unleashed. But when the sun finally crept over the mountains, there were no sirens, no flashing lights, just the long, quiet breath of a new day. Except this wasn't just any day. It was the day they stopped hiding. Ellis had been on the phone since dawn, working his old judicial network. By the time Camille made coffee, he already had half a dozen allies lined up: law professors, retired judges, advocacy group. He handed Camille a notepad filled with names and phone numbers. "We go public today," he said flatly. "No more back rooms, no more back doors. We take this to the people." Harold nodded from the dining table, holding a mug of hot tea with shaky hands. His face looked pale, but his eyes burned with determination. "Get Teresa on the line?" he rasped. Camille grabbed her phone and dialed. Teresa picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you're ready," Teresa said without even saying hello. "We're ready," Camille replied. "What's the latest?" Teresa's voice sounded tighter than usual. "They're digging deeper, Camille. The mayor just leaked a statement claiming they have witnesses who say your dad was acting erratically before the stop. They're pushing this mental decline narrative hard. They even reached out to national outlets. It's spreading." Camille's stomach churned. "And the DOJ? They're still reviewing jurisdiction," Teresa answered, frustration thick in her voice. "But I've got another card to play. There's a reporter, Lena Carter. She's one of the best investigative journalists in the country. She's been looking for a case like this for months. I trust her. And if she goes public with what we have, it'll blow this thing wide open." Harold leaned in. "Bring her." 3 hours later, Lena Carter stood in the living room of Ellis Harmon's cabin, her recording equipment already rolling. She was younger than Camille expected, early 40s maybe, but her energy filled the room like electricity. "I've read the police reports," Lena began, looking between Harold and Camille. "I've seen the press conferences, but I've also seen the holes, and frankly, none of it adds up." Camille nodded. "Because it's all a lie." Lena leaned forward. "Then let's tell the truth." For the next 2 hours, Harold recounted every moment, every word, every movement from the moment Brewster first flipped on his lights to the second he collapsed in that holding cell. Camille filled in the gaps, providing names, dates, legal documents. Ellis added his own observations, connecting the political motivations behind the scenes. And then, they showed her the footage. Mia's video, the recording from Camille's daughter. It wasn't much, just a shaky clip through a bedroom window, but it clearly showed a police officer entering their home during a so-called search and slipping something into a drawer before announcing they found it. Lena watched it twice. Then she leaned back, letting out a long, slow breath. "Well," she whispered, "they're going to regret picking this fight." By sunset, Lena's team had packaged the footage into a full exposé. It was set to air on national television that night, complete with interviews, expert analysis, and legal commentary. But just as the first segment was about to hit the airwaves, Camille's phone rang again. This time, it was Michael. "Camille, they're here." Camille's blood ran cold. "Who's there?" "Police. Dozens of them," Michael whispered. "They've surrounded Mom's house. I think they're going to arrest me." Camille's heart pounded so loud she could barely hear her own voice. "Keep the kids safe. Put Mia on with her phone. Get everything on video." Michael didn't argue. Moments later, Mia's voice came through, shaking but determined. "I've got it, Mom. I'm already recording." Camille's throat tightened. "Good girl, keep recording no matter what." Across town, the police knocked on the front door of Michael's mother's house. Michael answered with his hands up, calm but firm. "My wife is on the phone," he announced. "My daughter is recording. This is being documented." But the officers didn't flinch. They grabbed him anyway, twisting his arms behind his back, forcing him to the ground right in front of his kids. Camille could hear everything, Mia crying, Malcolm shouting, Michael grunting as they pinned him down. And then the line went dead. Camille fell to her knees, clutching the phone to her chest, fighting the scream building in her throat. Harold tried to stand, his face pale, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "No," he croaked, "not my family, not again." Ellis rushed to help him back into the chair, but Harold shoved his hand away. "No more hiding," Harold gasped. "We end this, now." Camille grabbed her laptop, pulling up Lena's contact. She sent one simple message: "Release everything, now." And within minutes, the country knew. The exposé aired live on primetime television. Lena Carter's report didn't pull punches. It showed everything: the planted evidence, the false charges, the illegal search. She revealed the names of every officer involved, including Brewster, Draper, the chief, and the mayor. She showed the footage of Mia's recording. She even revealed the text messages Camille had received from Teresa, proving that political players were pulling the strings. The response was instant. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #Justice for Freeman, #End Police Corruption, and #Protect Our Judges started trending worldwide. News outlets scrambled to pick up the story. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support. Protesters began gathering outside the Asheville Police Department, demanding justice. And just when it seemed like the city couldn't possibly spin their way out of it, Alexandra Rivera from the DOJ called. "They've seen enough," Alexandra said. "We're launching a full federal investigation, effective immediately." Camille felt her knees buckle again, this time from relief. "Thank you," she whispered. But Alexandra wasn't finished. "And Camille, I've just been informed that your husband is being held at the county facility. We're sending federal agents to retrieve him now." Camille choked back a sob. "Thank you." After the call, Camille turned to her father, who was sitting silently, watching the news coverage with tears streaming down his face. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "You stood your ground. And now the world knows." Harold shook his head slowly. "This isn't over," he murmured. "Not yet. They'll fight back harder than ever now. Camille nodded. "Then so will we." Because the Freeman family wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The pressure on Asheville exploded overnight. What started as a local scandal had now grown into a full-blown national crisis. Protesters packed the streets in front of City Hall. The police department's phone lines were flooded with calls from every corner of the country. National news trucks lined the roads, their satellite dishes pointed skyward, all waiting to capture every new development. But for Harold Freeman, the real battle wasn't just in the media. It was in the system itself. And the system was fighting back. Camille barely had time to process the DOJ's announcement before another storm hit. She was sitting by her father's side, watching the live coverage, when her phone buzzed again. It was Teresa. "You need to see this," Teresa said, her voice shaky. Camille clicked the link Teresa sent. Her breath caught in her throat. It was security camera footage. Grainy, low resolution, but clear enough. It showed a black man, someone who vaguely resembled Harold, causing a disturbance at a gas station a few nights earlier. The man was shouting, stumbling, knocking over displays. The headline on the video? Exclusive footage reveals Supreme Court Justice Freeman's erratic behavior days before arrest. Camille felt the blood drain from her face. "They're doubling down," Teresa whispered. "This is how they're going to justify everything. They're trying to make him look unstable, unfit to sit on the bench." Camille's fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. "That's not even him," she growled. "It's a different man. Anyone with eyes can see that." "It doesn't matter," Teresa said. "The lie is out there now, and they're counting on people not looking too closely." Camille turned to Harold, who had already seen the headline scrolling across the television screen. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. He just sighed and leaned back in his chair, like a man who'd watched this playbook unfold one too many times. "They're not just trying to discredit me," Harold said quietly. "They're trying to wear us down, make us second-guess ourselves, make us doubt the fight." Camille swallowed hard. "We're not backing down." And they didn't. By midday, the cabin had become a full-blown war room. Ellis, Camille, Harold, Teresa, and Lena Carter's team were all there. Phones ringing non-stop, emails flooding in. Civil rights attorneys from across the country were offering support. Whistleblowers from other departments were reaching out with their own stories. It was bigger than Asheville now. It was bigger than Harold. And yet, the threats kept coming. Ellis stepped outside to take a call. When he came back in, his face was pale. "They vandalized my house," Ellis announced quietly. Everyone froze. "They spray-painted threats across the front door, broke windows, slashed the tires on my car." Camille's heart sank. "We're running out of safe ground," she whispered. But Harold leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Then we stand right here," he said firmly, "and we make them come to us." Camille nodded, but deep down, she knew they were dangerously exposed. That night, while the team prepared statements for the next media push, there was a knock at the door. Camille's heart jumped into her throat. Ellis peeked through the curtain, then turned back, his face twisted with confusion. "It's a cop." Everyone tensed. Camille grabbed her father's hand. "Stay back." Ellis opened the door cautiously. Standing on the porch was a young black woman in plain clothes. She held up her badge. "Officer Tamara Jackson," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I need to speak with Justice Freeman. Privately." Ellis blocked the doorway. "We're not interested in more setups." But Jackson held up both hands. "I'm not here to hurt him. I'm here to help." Harold pushed himself up from his chair, wincing as his body protested. "Let her in," Harold rasped. Camille wanted to argue, but the look in her father's eyes told her not to. Tamara stepped inside, glancing nervously around the room. She pulled a small flash drive from her jacket pocket. This is the original footage," she whispered. "The real footage. Before they erased it." Cammie's breath hitched. "What?" Tamara nodded quickly, her hands trembling. "I made a copy before they wiped the servers. It shows everything. The traffic stop, the search, the drugs being planted. All of it." Ellis stepped forward. "Why now? Why are you here?" Tamara swallowed hard, her eyes shining with fear. "My father was framed just like this when I was a kid. I became a cop thinking I could change things from the inside. But I was wrong. It's worse than I ever imagined." Camille reached out slowly, taking the flash drive from Tamara's hand like it was made of glass. "If this is real, it's real," Tamara whispered. "And there's more. Emails, internal memos. They've been targeting black families in this city for years, using the same tactics, planting evidence, manufacturing charges, burying complaints." Harold leaned heavily on the back of a chair, breathing hard. "Why risk your career to bring this to us?" Tamara's lip trembled. "Because I can't let them destroy another family." Camille felt tears burning in her eyes as she reached out and hugged the young officer tightly. "Thank you," Camille whispered. "Thank you for not staying silent." Tamara pulled back, wiping her eyes. "There's one more thing," she added. "I overheard Brewster and Draper earlier today. They're planning something big. A raid. They're coming here. Tonight." Camille's blood turned to ice. "Are you sure?" Tamara nodded. "I heard it with my own ears. They're not going to let you make it to morning." Harold stood tall, ignoring the pain in his body. "Then we move first." Camille turned to Teresa. "Get Alexandra back on the line. We need federal agents here, right now." Within the hour, unmarked black SUVs pulled up to the cabin. FBI agents in plain clothes moved swiftly, securing the perimeter, setting up surveillance. Alexandra Rivera herself stepped out of the lead vehicle, her face hard as stone. "We've got you," she said, shaking Harold's hand firmly. "No more games, no more lies. This ends tonight." As the agents took position, Camille stood by her father's side, watching the stars disappear behind a rising bank of clouds. For the first time in days, she felt the tide begin to turn. But deep down, she knew the most dangerous fight was still ahead, and they'd have to survive the night to see it through. They waited. Every second felt like a lifetime. The cabin was dead quiet except for the soft hum of radios crackling in the hands of the FBI agents posted around the property. Camille stood by the window, staring out into the dark woods beyond the porch, her stomach twisted in knots. Somewhere out there, the people who had already taken so much were getting ready to take the rest. Harold sat in the center of the living room, surrounded by those who still stood with him. Camille, Ellis, Teresa, Lena, Alexandra, and Tamara Jackson, who had risked her life and career to bring them the truth. The small flash drive she had handed them earlier now sat on the table, already duplicated and uploaded to multiple secure servers. No matter what happened tonight, the evidence was safe. But Harold knew that didn't mean they were. He shifted forward, wincing at the tightness in his chest, but his voice didn't waver. "They're not coming here to arrest us," Harold said quietly. "They're coming here to shut us down. For good." Camille swallowed hard, her throat burning. "We've got the FBI now, Dad. We've got agents on every side of this cabin." Harold shook his head. "That won't stop desperate men. You back a cornered animal into a wall. It doesn't roll over. It lunges." Alexandra stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Harold's shoulder. "We're prepared," she assured him. "We've already notified the state attorney general. We've got federal warrants waiting to drop. As soon as they make a move, we have the authority to end this." Harold looked up at her, his eyes heavy with the weight of a lifetime of battles. "Let's just pray they give us the chance." It happened just after 2 a.m. The first headlights appeared on the long, winding road leading to the cabin. One car, then two, then three, unmarked, no sirens. But they weren't trying to hide either. The engines grew louder as the vehicles rolled to a stop just outside the front gate. Camille's heart pounded in her ears as she watched the silhouettes step out of the cars. Brewster, Draper, and half a dozen others, all armed, all ready. One of the FBI agents at the window muttered into his radio. "They're here." Alexandra moved quickly, pulling her badge and stepping toward the door. "No one fires unless fired upon," she ordered. "We take them alive. We end this legally." But Camille could already feel it in the air. They weren't here for a conversation. The door burst open without warning. Brewster stood in the frame, gun raised, face twisted with rage. "Everybody down," he bellowed. "This ends tonight." The FBI agents responded instantly, weapons drawn, shouting commands. But Brewster didn't lower his weapon. Draper flanked him, eyes wild, finger trembling on the trigger. Alexandra stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, you're surrounded!" But Brewster didn't flinch. "You think that badge means anything out here?" Brewster snarled. "This is our jurisdiction." Tamara Jackson stepped into view, shaking but steady. "No, Scott, it's not anymore." Brewster's face twisted in fury when he saw her. You're dead." But Tamara didn't back down. She raised her own badge high. "I'm a federal witness now," she shot back. "And I've got every word of your conspiracy on tape." Brewster let out a roar of frustration, taking one step closer to Harold, his gun now pointed directly at the older man's chest. "You ruined me," Brewster hissed. "You ruined everything." Time seemed to slow. Camille felt herself move before she even realized it. She threw herself in front of her father, her arms out wide. "Put the gun down," she screamed. "You're done. It's over." For a split second, no one breathed. Then, a single shot rang out. Camille flinched, but there was no pain, no impact. She opened her eyes. Brewster's gun had dropped to the floor. Behind him, 2 federal agents had tackled him from behind, slamming him face first into the ground. Draper tried to run, but she didn't make it 2 steps before another agent pinned her to the wall. Chaos erupted as the rest of the rogue officers were taken down one by one. Shouts, handcuffs, snapping shut, radios buzzing. And just like that, it was over. Camille collapsed into her father's arms, shaking from the adrenaline. Harold held her tight, whispering softly, "You did it, baby. You did it." But Camille shook her head. "No, Dad. We did it." The next few days were a blur. The FBI moved fast, raiding the Asheville Police Department, City Hall, and even the mayor's private residence. Dozens of officers were arrested. Evidence of years of corruption poured out like a broken dam. Lena Carter's follow-up report aired in primetime again, this time showing the footage Tamara had risked everything to deliver. The planted evidence, the illegal searches, the cover-ups, public pressure mounted. Federal prosecutors stepped in. The mayor resigned in disgrace. The police chief was indicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy and obstruction of justice. And Officer Scott Brewster? He faced life in federal prison. Through it all, Harold never left the fight. Even from his hospital bed, he gave interviews. He testified before Congress. His voice, though tired, carried the weight of justice louder than ever. Camille watched him with awe. Even after everything, he stood taller than any man she'd ever known. A year later, standing on the steps of the Supreme Court, Harold Freeman addressed the nation one final time. He spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor. Not just of a traffic stop gone wrong, not just of a smear campaign, but of a system designed to silence people like him. And yet, he was still standing, still fighting, still believing in the promise of justice, not just for himself, but for all those whose voices were never heard. He ended his speech with the words he had once whispered to Camille in the dark. We don't let them write the ending, because in the end, justice wrote its own. If there's one thing this story reminds us all, it's that no matter how far you've come in Lifeno, matter your title, your accomplishments, or the respect you've earned, there are still systems in this world designed to strip you of your dignity in a heartbeat. But what defines you isn't how the world treats you, it's how you respond. Just as Harold Freeman could have given up, he could have signed that paper, walked away quietly, and let corruption win. But instead, he stood up, not just for himself, but for every person who's ever been silenced, humiliated, or framed because of who they are. And that's the lesson for all of us. We're never too old to stand for what's right. We're never too small to make a difference. The fight for justice doesn't end when you retire. It doesn't end when life gets hard. It ends when you stop showing up. So keep showing up. Keep speaking up. And if this story moved you even just a little, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth it.